Hello again, and welcome to the Dorothy L. Sayers podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably already read some Sayers, and you may be asking, what should I read next? I thought I'd offer some guidance, especially if you want to transition from one genre of a writing to another. Now, speaking of transitions, you may have noticed we don't have any transitional music or any of that material because Spotify for Podcasters has now kind of rolled us over into Riverside, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So it's been a little frustrating, but hopefully it'll be good. And so just bear with me with any audio issues or anything like that, and I don't think you'll miss the music too much. So let's get on to Sayers, back to Sayers, actually. So Sayers' writing career spanned from the 19-teens to the 1950s, and she used her skills to write in several different genres. Her published works fall into the following broad categories: mysteries, poetry, plays, nonfiction, translations, and letters. We will cover all of the categories today, but not all of the works, and we won't be going in chronological order. But I will point out general trends and also suggest some good starting places. Also, I discovered that Wikipedia has a webpage entitled List of Works by Dorothy L. Sayers. It's very helpful to discover the original publishing date and also whether something is a collection of stories or a novel, and sometimes that's kind of hard to tell with the Peter Wimsey material. So the first category is her Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries. These put her on the map, and they are highly entertaining. There are short stories and novels and one play adaptation, and they are delightful. She does a lovely job setting you in aristocratic England of the 20s and 30s, and if you want to read something with a good dialogue and clever plot, these are for you. I recommend starting at the beginning with Whose Body, but you can also jump into the series with Murder Must Advertise or The Unpleasantness of the Bologna Club. Do not read Gaudy Night or Have His Carcass or Busman's Honeymoon without reading Strong Poison. Strong Poison introduces Harriet Vane, and the tension between Peter and Harriet won't make any sense without reading Strong Poison. And so you need to read that first before you read Gaudy Night, Have His Carcass, or Busman's Honeymoon. She does have another small series with another detective named Montague Egg. These are fun, but I recommend starting with Wimsey. The second category is her poetry, and you could say poetry was her first and most lasting literary love. Her first book-length publication was poetry. It was entitled Op 1, and then she published Catholic Tales and Christian Songs. She kept writing poetry her entire life, and her activities in this area deserve an entire podcast. I'm just now getting into her poetry, so I can't say much, but I recommend The Poetry of Dorothy L. Sayers, edited by Ralph E. Hone. It was published in 1996 by the Dorothy Sayers Society and the Wade Center in conjunction. It's a great little book. It shares the poems of her whole life with you, from her school days to her translations of Dante. And I would say one of my favorite poems in there is she talks about electricity, which is kind of neat, the onset of electricity, even though she's writing in the 1950s. The third category is her plays, which, if they were in a pie chart, they'd be approximately 90% historical theological, 7% Lord Peter Wimsey, and 3% something else. The something else is entitled Love All, which is out of print. The Peter Wimsey was her first stab at writing a play, and it is a story of Wimsey's honeymoon. The book version was based off of the play, and it's Busman's Honeymoon, is what it's called. I've never seen the play, but the book version is a lot of fun and possibly contains the most romance Sayers has ever put in a novel. But you can't read it unless you've read Strong Poison, and for good measure, Gaudy Night. The remaining 90% of the plays, though hard to read at times, are sheer brilliance. A nice starting place may be The Devil to Pay, which is a retelling of the classic make a deal with the devil motif. If you like reading about Dr. Faustus, or if you enjoyed The Devil Went Down to George by Charlie Daniels, this is good for you. That was a song, by the way. You start with The Devil to Pay. If you're feeling historical, try Zeal for Thy House, which is a nice medieval reflection on artistic pride, or The Emperor Constantine. And I've got an episode on the Emperor Constantine entitled Emperor Constantine. You could also try He That Should Come or The Man Who Would Be King. These were groundbreaking BBC dramas that earned her critical acclaim by presenting the biblical story without the hypnotism of ecclesiastical isms. The plays as a whole are harder to find, but Whitford publishes them individually for about $20 each. You can also find older volumes with several of the plays included. I've never seen any of the plays performed, but the reading is great, even though it's harder than the novels. They're so profound that they're worth the effort. The fourth category is her nonfiction. most of which are articles converted from speeches given to various societies. Most of these were written or presented in the 1940s and early 50s. I'd say these represent the most diverse of topics. Two of the podcasts here, Why Work and Lost Tools of Learning, stem straight from an article. Her most notable nonfiction work is Mind of the Maker, a book-length treatment comparing the Trinitarian nature of God to the Trinitarian nature of an artist's work. Mind of the Maker is approachable and helpful, no matter whether you're trying to understand art or the Trinity better. Reading the source is always the best. If you want a better idea of what Mind of the Maker is about, you can listen to episode 5 of season 2, which is a few ways to think about the Trinity. Several other episodes also deal with Dante, take their cue from Dante, and she's got lots of works on Dante, which I'm going to deal with in a minute. And like I said, go to Wikipedia or type in lists of works of Dorothy L. Sayers, and you'll see what I mean. So we've covered her detective novels, her poetry, her plays, and her nonfiction. Her nonfiction, just to sum up, is so vast that you probably want to get a collection. I would recommend maybe Letters to a Diminished Church is a recent publication. I don't have the dates, but that's a good one to start with. Next up is her translations. As she once said to her friend Barbara Reynolds, "I began as a poet and a scholar." She earned her master's in medieval literature from Oxford, and from an early stage in her life she was interested in translating medieval poetry. Even while becoming known as a detective novelist, she was translating the 12th century French legend of Tristan and Isolde into modern English. Towards the end of her life, she would publish a translation of another medieval French legend, the Song of Roland. This was published at the request of E.V. Roux, who was starting up that press that we all know and love called Penguin Press. But the reason we have this section on translation is her work with possibly the greatest medieval poet, Dante Alighieri. We already have several podcasts about this, but I just want to note that she translated Dante from the Italian using his original rhyme scheme. So when you read the Sayers translation with Penguin, which is easily available on Amazon, you are reading the original rhyme pattern, which is pretty rare with poem translations. Next up are her letters. As I've been preparing this podcast, I've been digging through some of her letters, and it's been hard to make any progress, because she's just so quotable. For example, when I was trying to find that reference about her being a scholar, I came across this letter to one Reverend Father Connell. It's short, so I'm going to read it to you. It's always good to have Sayers' actual voice here. To the Reverend Father Connell, 17th of April, 1945. Dear Father Connell, the devil has a rooted dislike to any display of vigor in radio religion, which makes me think that canned Christianity may be, after all, a better thing than one is apt to suppose. I remember thinking one day that it might be a good idea to write and suggest to Dr. Welch that some of his people might preach a little more cross and a little less theism. I was getting breakfast at the time, and the devil instantly threw to the floor a jug of coffee that was standing quite quietly on the stove, and subsequently, annoyed because I wrote my letter after all, afflicted my cat with a colic, so that my eiderdown was ruined and knocked my daily woman off her bicycle, laying her up for a fortnight with a badly cut leg. If he had attacked me, I could have excused it, but to take it out on the coffee and the cat and the charwoman seemed particularly spiteful and vulgar. I merely mention this trifling incident because, so far as it goes, it confirms your own experience. The devil is an ass. Anyhow, because I didn't think my idea any of great importance, and should probably have been too indolent to write the letter if he hadn't started to play the fool with the coffee pot. So, her letters are so diverse in topic, and she does such a good writing them, that they're like a buffet. You want to eat and store it all, but you can't really. You just have to kind of take what you can and enjoy it. Now, there are 4 volumes of her letters, actually 5, but we'll get to that. The first 2 are easily available on Amazon and take you from her early life and up to her writing of the Wimsey novels and her plays, up to 1943. I'd suggest ordering the second 2 volumes, including several letters to Williams and Lewis, and deal with Dante quite a bit. That's what those 2 volumes do, the second 2. Order them straight from the Dorothy L. Sayers Society website. If you're in America, you'll have to pay a hefty fee for shipping, but so far I've found that it's still cheaper than buying them on Amazon. That covers the major categories of her writing, but I want to finish up with another category. There are 5 volumes of her letters published by the Dorothy L. Sayers Society, but the 5th volume isn't actually letters. It's entitled Dorothy L. Sayers, Child and Woman of Her Time, and this slim volume includes 2 unpublished, unfinished autobiographical works. One is a nonfiction memoir called My Edwardian Childhood, and the other is a fictionalized memoir entitled Katamari. They're somewhat edited, but as I said, not complete. I just read them a couple months ago, and they're delightful. Unlike some of her other works, these don't take a lot of mental effort. They talk primarily about her childhood and school days, and then a bit of her romantic life as a grown woman. If you want to know about education for women in the early 1900s, this is a great resource. You guys know, if you've listened to this podcast or read any Sayers, she's a powerful thinker. She can wrestle with Platonism or the theology of the creeds with the best of them. But what makes her so fun to read is how she deals with actual things, like the coffee pot she wrote about earlier. I want to read to you her rather scientific description of an old bath toy. And this is from My Edwardian Childhood. Another Oxford figure that I faintly recall is that of Mrs. Slater, the cathedral verger's wife. She lived near us in Brewer Street, and her greeting for me was, "Oh, the little lamb then," an expression which my father often used to quote, mimicking her manner of speech. I liked Mrs. Slater, and she gave me a china dog, which stood for many years on the nursery mantelpiece and was a beloved companion in my bath, till one day it fell into the grate and was broken. It was hollow, and there was a small hole in its base by which the water slowly entered, causing it to swim in a fascinating lopsided manner. It was a very small hole, and the conflict between the entering water and the outgoing air made it curious and entertaining, thin singing and bubbling. Then, too, there was the fun of seeing Nurse shake the water out again at the end of bath time. I had other things that swam in the bath, notably a green china frog. This, however, got broken easily, it lost a forefoot, and thereafter would not swim. Interesting thought about the evolution of bath toys as well. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Sayers' works that you can read, several others are housed in the Wade Center, I hope, waiting for intrepid publishers. Anyway, Sayers, let me finish that sentence. Sayers' works can be roughly divided into 6 or 7 categories: mysteries, poetry, plays, nonfiction, translations, and letters. And I recommend for you to check one of them out so you can know what to read next when it comes to Sayers. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at dorothyelsayerspodcast@gmail.com. God bless you.